I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and today on the show, we are joined by Zach Ferenbaugh from the Hunting Public to dive into how he would handle some of the most difficult situations in the deer hunting world. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. Today we are wrapping up our series of What Would You Do podcasts. Hopefully you've heard the three prior. We've talked to Jeff Sturgis, Michael Hunsucker, and Adam Hayes, and you know the deal. We're going to break down and discuss a series of different hypothetical scenarios. We're going to paint a picture, and we're going to have our guests describe how they would handle this situation, what they would do, how they think about it, etc. Our guest today is someone you probably know, hopefully know. He's been on the podcast in the past. He's well known because of his exploits on YouTube. This is Zach Ferenbaugh. He is a member of the Hunting Public team. Previously was seen on Midwest Whitetail. Zach is a phenomenal whitetail hunter, and he's doing it almost all on public land these days. And uniquely, compared to a lot of folks, he's doing it almost all on the ground now. He has really gotten into and perfected a style of hunting in which he's on the ground, still hunting, spot and stalking, occasionally ambushing, but he's doing it not from a tree. He's doing it down at deer eye level, and he's done it, at an astounding rate of success. This guy knows what he's doing. So I today want to see how he would handle a set of different situations. And I brought on my buddy and Wired to Hunt host of the Wired to Hunt Foundations podcast, Tony Peterson, to help me do it. So Tony and I are going to present a bunch of ideas and situations and stories and circumstances to Zach, and we'll see how he handles them. That is it. That's the game plan. This one's really good. We get into some good stuff. Even if you don't hunt from the ground, even if you don't think that's something you want to do, we get into some good general deer hunting knowledge kind of conversations that I think will help anyone out there, whether you hunt public land or private land. There are some really good themes here that we touch on, so I'd highly encourage you to give this one a listen. In other news, I would just remind you to be following all of our Wired Hunt content because we are pumping it out at double speed these days. We're getting out new articles on the new Wired Hunt website. You can find that at themeateater.com/wired, WIRED, or just Google Wired to Hunt. You'll find it there. We're putting in a lot of work to get these articles out there from great people that really know what they're doing. Tony and I are pushing out our new YouTube videos, so check that out. We've got quick educational videos coming out on the Wired Hunt YouTube channel. Lots going to be coming out on social media here too. Hunting season is kicking off for both Tony and I, and Spencer, and all the other folks on the Wired Hunt team. It's kicking off for a lot of us in just a matter of weeks. So it's go time, and I hope you are. I hope you're as excited as I am, because we work all winter, spring, summer to lead up to this point, and and now it's time to cash in on all that investment of time. So here's the opening day coming soon. And with that out of the way, let's get to my chat. Me and Tony talking with Zach Ferenbaugh. All right, with me on the line, I've got Zach Ferenbaugh. Zach, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I just was looking back to try to see when it was we talked last on here, and it was, I think, 2018, so almost 3 years ago. So it's definitely good that we're doing this again, and definitely good that we've got you on for this kind of episode, because you're kind of wrapping up a series for us, Zach. For the last month or so, we've been doing this series of What Would You Do podcasts. And I told you a little bit about this, but the basic gist of it is that we give people a whole series of challenging hypothetical situations. We're going to paint a picture of a hunting scenario, throw you in the middle of it, and see how you would handle it, what your thought process would be, why you would do what you do, etc. And then if you can make it out the other side and you're still alive, you win. You get to go on and continue on with your day. So that's what we wanted to put you through. Are you up for that?
I'm up for it. Let's do it.
All right. And I brought my secret weapon with me. It's not just me. Tony Peterson is here to throw the real curveballs.
Yeah. It's a pleasure to get to do this with you, Zach.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited to hear what type of situations I get tossed into.
Only the worst, Zach. But
That's good. It's a true test.
The way I like to look at this is it's like a little bit of preseason training. Like people in football right now, they're at training camp, they're getting ready for the season. Well, all three of us have our hunting seasons kicking off here in a matter of weeks. So I figure let's mentally go through some of those tough times so that when they actually do arrive in season, it'll be a piece of cake. We've already been through it.
Hey.
Mark already forced me into this one, and I figured it out.
I love it. I love like visualizations and trying to prep mentally. I love it. I'm into it.
Yes. All right. Well, I think we should just jump into it. No beating around the bush. Let's just get going on these. And the first one is a little different than the rest, because I'm going to ask you to actually step out of your own usual situation and instead imagine you're in an alternate universe. In this alternate universe, Zach, you are not filming for the hunting public. You are not able to hunt for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks a year. Instead, you're working a day job, and you got to work every day, all day. It's like 10-hour days. You get home and you have 3 kids, and they need you doing stuff with them right when you get home. And on the weekends, you're slammed with house duties and all that kind of stuff. So instead of being able to take off for a week-long rut hunt or a week-long hunt in September and a week-long here to this state and that state, instead of that, you maybe could get away with 2 hours on a Saturday morning. And the thing is that you are in a meat crisis. Like the season is just opening up. Your freezer's empty. The family needs food like now. And you've got 2 hours on a Saturday morning. So my question to you is this. In that situation, if that was your life and you had 2 hours opening Saturday morning, let's say, how exactly would you go about doing that? Like, what would be the specific way you would approach that situation, and how would that be different than what you do when you're traveling on a week-long hunt trying to kill a big buck? Walk me through like the details of what you do in that one, because we always talk about how to kill a big buck. We never talk about how to kill a doe quickly. What would you do then?
Sure. I think that if I was in that situation, trying to squeeze, it sounds like, the busy lifestyle with not a lot of time to focus on, finding deer. But any chance I got outside of that 2 hours, maybe on my way home from work, if I could swing and just do a little bit of glassing, that's a big thing that I think we don't necessarily talk about a lot in our situation. But like something I've done in the past, like when I was in school or just, working a job in between school, it's like if I only had a little bit of time, I'm trying to spend more time just kind of driving around, trying to figure out what deer are doing. That way, when you do have that 2 hours, you're able to just, commit to being in, the right spot. Because obviously if you're on limited time, you want to put the odds in your favor as much as possible. And if you can't get out and put boots on the ground or whatever, hunting, just any little thing that can help just tell you what the deer are doing. So what I would try to do probably in that situation, if it's Saturday morning, is when I have the time, maybe I would try to make a loop before work, depending obviously, if work starts at, 5 a.m. and I got to work until dark or whatever, it's like, that's going to be more difficult, but, just trying to put as much time, glassing or just cruising around places that I have access to would be huge. I think about not exactly this situation because, it definitely is an alternate universe because I don't have any kids, but like when I was in college and working in the winter, I would get home from work and would just have like this tiny little window to where I could just drive around, check out the places that I was hunting. And I was able to put a pretty decent pattern on what the deer were doing. That way, when I did get the opportunity over the weekend to get out and hunt, I was able to just go right to where I felt like I had the most confidence, and just try to take advantage of that small amount of time. So, that's just, I guess, how I would try to create a little bit of extra time. I would just try to go out of my way to just get a tiny little bit. I mean, it may literally be just driving by and checking the open field or pasture or whatever, just to see if deer are moving through it. And then that's just, helping put me in the game because, you're talking that little amount of time. You definitely want to put all the odds in your favor.
Yep. I follow you there for sure. Okay. So you've added a little bit of intel through scouting. Now Saturday morning arrives. Walk me through like a hypothetical morning hunt. Would you still be stalking like you do a lot of times now? Or do you think with this situation, you would instead post up in some kind of place? Like what specifically would you do with those 2 hours?
I think if I just had 2 hours, like I would just try to be, so like hopefully that intel from driving around would give me like, okay, I can assume deer coming from this bedding area. They're feeding in this spot, they're bedding in this spot. And, maybe I've learned a little bit of a pattern that way. I would just try to get in, with that amount of time and stuff. I wouldn't, I guess in general, I've gotten away from using a lot of gear. So it's like, if I just have that amount of time, I'd probably just slip in somewhere, set up on the ground, have a really high odds shot inside of 20 yards. And then, if the opportunity was there, I would absolutely always stalk. But, I guess probably what I would do is just slip in, set up on the ground in the dark and, try not to make a whole lot of noise. Way it can kind of be in and out and, not have a huge impact on that area and just be able to, I guess, hop in there and hopefully get something down. I guess I'm always at this point, at least in this universe that I live in, I'm always trying to make moves on stuff if the opportunity's there. But in this situation with just a short window, I would just have to play that by ear. If something was moving and I needed to get closer, absolutely would get aggressive on it. But I guess the initial setup would be just that, like a setup probably tucked in somewhere. Nothing real fancy, just, hopefully a high odd shot where I got deer, coming in close, but, also having that confidence to be in that location just based off that intel from driving around before work or after work or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Follow up on that. Let's assume that, right, you're trying to fill a freezer. So you would shoot a doe, you would shoot a 1.5-year-old spike, whatever. And let's say one of those deer shows up, but out of range, and you find yourself thinking, okay, I've got to put a move on these deer. Would you, I don't know if you've had some experiences with this in your own life and you've noticed anything, but have you noticed anything different with how you need to or how you can approach and try to stalk in on a mature doe versus a mature buck or something like that? Is there anything you're doing different, thinking about different, trying to be more careful about or less careful about when trying to move in closer with a deer like this?
I think that with does, the biggest thing is you've got, a lot of times with a mature doe, you've got, younger deer with it. So if that's the case, it just is more eyes. Therefore, that can be a little bit challenging. And, as soon as one of those fawns picks its head up and gives you that alert, like, hey, what's that? Usually the doe's right behind and starts getting real curious real quick. But, as far as a lone deer, it's just kind of the same thing. I mean, ideally, I'd always rather be moving in on a lone deer versus a group of deer. More eyes, more noses, makes it more challenging for sure. But I wouldn't say there's any real difference. I guess maybe with the doe, I would be like more aggressive there, just because it's like typically there's more of them in the woods versus a mature buck. But at the same time, the goal is to fill the freezer. Like, just, I guess, taking it appropriate and just reading the deer. If I can see a deer, that's when I feel the most confident, because you can just read that body language. It's like, if it's feeding and relaxed and just browsing through the woods, moving slow, you can keep cutting distance. And then obviously if a deer is bedded in one spot and you can see it, it becomes really easy to read the body language, because it's like you're either good or you're not. You can tell real quick. And a lot of times if you can read the body language, it's like there's any amount of like alertness to the deer, you just back off a little bit, or not back off, but just slow down, let the situation play out, let the deer calm down, and then keep making your move. So I wouldn't treat it that much different. I do think that does tend to like rely on other deer more. So that's the one major difference, where, a mature buck bedded alone, like way off away from all the other deer, he's got to be checking himself a little bit more frequently. But at the same time, you throw a doe with a couple fawns in there and she cares about protecting those fawns a lot. So like she's really looking a lot. So just, it's just, I would just treat it pretty much the same. And like, I always think of it like this: if I'm making a move on a deer, it's like, when I'm committed to shooting that deer, I just try to put my mind in like a different, completely different state than normal. Like, I'm not thinking about anything else other than making the perfect move. It's just like total game time, focus, don't make any little mistakes, don't break any sticks. Just really, really, really focus in on that. And because I think of it like this, it's like, if you're committed to doing it and you're going to make every perfect move, like there's really nothing. And I guess if you make every move perfectly, you don't make any noise, you don't really, you're probably not going to spook the deer. But if you start getting lazy and you start thinking, this isn't worth it, and then you bump the deer, you're going to look back on that moment where you took a play off, and you're going to get mad at yourself. And I just think, hey, even when I start to make a move too fast, I like check myself and remember, hey, if you make this move too fast, you're probably going to blow it. And if you blow it, you're going to never like let yourself, I'm always just going to remember that moment and think, man, why did I just like lay off? Why did I take a play off?
So if I were to bet you, a full American quarter, would you take that? Would you take that bet that you could get this deer killed in 2 hours on a Saturday morning for a quarter?
That's a tough one. There's a lot of variables that come into play. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, it's always one of those things. Like, I think when you set, no matter what goal you set, when you set a goal, it's like, if you, I guess let's put it this way. In my experience, the times when I say I'm going to go shoot a deer in, X amount of time, it usually ends up being more of a challenge than I think. You set this goal and you're like, oh, I got this easy. I got this in the bag, man. I'm going to go out and I'm going to shoot a deer and I'm going to get meat in the freezer. Like, I'm just going to fill a tag. It's like every time I say that, it ends up being more of a challenge than I think. So, I don't know. I'd say there's a 50-50 chance that I'd pull it off. I don't really know.
I've got faith. I think you'll get that 25-cent piece. That's my take on it. So let's pull you back into the real universe. Yeah. Let's put you back into your own life. And Tony, where do you want to take it?
Hey, can we stay in this alternate universe for a second, Mark?
Oh, sure.
Because I think, well, two things. You could have given him 11 kids and made him an accountant, and you didn't. you went really easy on him, and you didn't have any there wasn't any roadblocks there. You could have went nuts. But what I think, I love that hypothetical, because Zach, when I hear you talk about, just hunting a meat deer, let's say, there's still so many variables and still this reluctance to just be like, I got this. And I think that's an important point we should kind of break down a little bit. Is we give advice constantly on hunt big bucks, hunt mature bucks. And then you throw this out there. This is reality for a lot of people where, killing any deer is not easy. It depends where you're hunting and your experience level. And what you're really describing is all these different things that go into just trying to find a concentration of any deer and then get in on them and get that bow shot. And that's like the basis for you becoming this guy who can go out and stalk bucks, and in some ways have an easier stalk on them if they're loners and they're in the right spot versus those doe groups. It's kind of a neat thought exercise, because it kind of highlights how difficult this stuff really is for us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just in general, we talk about big bucks, I guess, and we don't talk about just killing deer. And I think that it's I guess let's put it this way. I always think in my own situation, like if there's a deer that goes by in bow range, like it's a little success, because there's a lot of days, even when I'm looking for a big buck, that I don't, have the opportunity to take a shot at a doe. Even there's a lot of days I don't have deer in range. So like anytime, I really do see it as a huge win anytime a deer walks past me. Like, a small buck, doe, whatever. I love it. Like it like gets me so excited, because it's just like, man, like I really did something special here, because I fooled the deer. I fooled the deer's nose and eyes, and I guess I always just mark it as a little win. I can think back to last season hunting in Ohio, in the hills of Ohio. Like I can tell you the very few days that I had deer even in range. Like I can remember them specifically. And, I would say it's interesting. I guess this is interesting in general, that when you're hunting big bucks, it does seem to be that like you don't actually get a ton of like other deer in range necessarily. Like I would say 50% of the deer that I got in range were, and I didn't kill any during bow season. I did end up shooting one in Ohio with a gun, but not during bow season. I would say 50% of the deer I had in range were like does or younger bucks that I chose not to shoot, but like the other 50% were some pretty nice bucks. It's just really weird how that ends up working out. So anytime I do have a deer in range, it's like awesome. Yep. Because it is a challenge. I mean, it's something we take for granted, is like having a wild animal inside of bow range, especially inside of like 20 yards. It's like quite the feat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good example of how valuable it is to learn to hunt deer first, and focus on the big bucks later. But if you can't get there, the same thing happens, when people go out west for the first time and they're going to hunt elk, and they're like, oh, I just want a nice like 275 inch, 300 inch bull. And you're like, man, you got to learn to get around elk first. And that might take you 10 seasons. Like it's crawling before you walk type of stuff. Should I throw my first scenario at him now, Mark? Have we explored that alternate universe enough?
Yeah, I mean, you did intrigue me by throwing the 11 kids and accounting and maybe marital strife. I would like to explore that, but for the sake of Zach, I say we move on.
All right. So Zach, I'm sure you guys hear this, and you've done a really good job with THP on expanding where you guys are traveling to and where you're filming. But I know I hear this a lot from people in the Deep South. So this is kind of where this scenario comes from. So you have 5 days to get it done in the swamps of Louisiana on public land, starting on their October 1 opener. This is a two-parter. What do you look for e-scouting before you ever hit the road? And then what's the first thing you do when you show up there in person?
Okay, so the very first thing, if I'm looking at the map, it's like, honestly, with deer right now, what I've been doing the last couple seasons is just mostly looking for access points to start, just seeing where the road touches public land. And then I'll zoom in and out and just kind of get a read on what every access point looks like. If there's a big pull-in with a big turnaround, I'm less interested in that versus something where, I don't see that pull off, or I don't see the big, kind of parking lot type access point. And then if there's any trails, kind of take note of those as well. But then I always just zoom out, look at it big scale, have those pins where I can tell there's obvious access points, and then just try to find like any corner, or like it may be a deep spot, but it may be something that's just kind of, I don't know, maybe like a backdoor type spot. I don't really, or, we always talk about overlooked, but like, that sometimes can get confusing. It's like overlooked can look a lot of different ways. An overlooked spot could be parking off the side of the road where there's not a major pull off and walking straight up a steep face to get, on the backside of a hill right off the road. It may look like, and I guess in Louisiana, that maybe not look like that, but maybe it's water. So maybe it's like, I can tell there's a bunch of water, and it's like, nobody's probably walking around this big slough and just hunting, ultimately 300 yards from the road or something. So I would look at it like that, try to find, again, access points, tough to find place, or, tough to get to places. And then once I get there, even with 5 days, I would spend, at least probably the first full day driving around and just like hopping out and looking at stuff real quick, like really just getting a gauge of what the area looks like, what these access points actually look like, how long does it take to drive to a spot from the nearest town, because those things have definitely an impact. Like even places I've, tons of places I've hunted, different states, like if you take that nearest town, which is kind of like probably where the most hunters are coming from, if you find a place on the particular piece of public land furthest from that town, if it takes, if you can be to the public land in like 15 minutes versus 45 or an hour and 15 to the other side of the piece of public, that's the type of stuff that I think does have an impact on pressure a little bit. Like that's a good start. There's always a chance that you get to a piece of public that you thought was going to be an easy access point, but maybe it's a wet year and that swamp has swelled up and is now going across the road and nobody can drive there. Maybe the river's flooded. All that stuff I think is really important to just get your eyes on, because if you just look at a piece of public and you're like, this is the funnel, like this is where they're going, that may be true, but in my experience, the places that I think are going to be the best, maybe they end up being good spots. Maybe that's even where I end up shooting a deer, but like a lot of times, I would say more times than that being the case, I'm driving around and I find some oddball thing that hinders people from getting into the public. And then, that ends up being something that I focus more on than I hadn't anticipated. So driving around looking for that type of access and everything. And then the next thing is just hopping. Well, the other thing that I do when I'm driving around is obviously look for deer. And I try to get this is one thing I guess I haven't mentioned a whole lot in general, is like, I drive real slow. Like I'm talking slow. I don't cover a whole bunch of ground. I'll literally drive with my head out the window looking for deer tracks. If you're on a sand road or like down south, in my experience, you have a little bit sandier of a road versus like Iowa, for example, you got like straight up hard gravel roads, harder to see deer tracks on the road. But driving down the road, hanging my head out the window, just looking for deer tracks. It's like if there starts to be a big increase in tracks, that might impact, where I want to be. Especially, if you see a big buck track, that might have an impact on where you're interested in hunting as well, or like a high density of big buck tracks. But drive really slow, look for tracks, look for trails crossing the road, and then also really break down the forest type. Like look at the difference in diversity. Like if you hit a big patch, like in the South, for example, a big patch of monotonous pine trees that are pretty mature, that are about, probably going to be harvested for, like in the rotation of the pine operation down there. It's like, if they're going to be cut soon and it's not real, not a whole lot of diversity going on, like I don't necessarily anticipate deer being right in that. But if I hit a patch of wetland where I can just tell you can just look at it and say, oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of different plants in this. I might start relating what I'm seeing in real life in this spot to, like, I'll look at where I'm at, look at it on the map, and try to find something that looks similar on the map, maybe that's harder to get to, that's not right off the road. So just getting a plant, inventory is really important to me too. Oak trees obviously have a big impact on, where deer could be. So while I'm driving around, looking at if an oak tree is hanging over the road or there are acorns laying on that dirt road, that. And then it's like, okay, that's a whatever oak. Then I know when I'm back in there, if I see that oak from a distance, I can assume that it's dropping acorns. It's all those little things. You're almost like, I think on that first day, driving around, you're just trying to gain as much knowledge as possible. And sometimes it really feels so silly where you're looking at the most minuscule little thing. You're it seems goofy that you're paying attention to it. Oh, there's a track right here on the road. But you got to think of it, detective style. You got to find every little, thing that could give you a clue and just relate that to where you're actually going to go hunting, So,
yep.
I think that's all that stuff's important for the first day. I guess that maybe answers the question. I think that answers the question.
It does. And what was interesting is it took you about 10 minutes to get to the deer because everything was about where are the people going to be first. And, a lot of e-scouting advice is like, hey, look for the funnels, look for these soft edges, look for stuff that's, important to deer. But if you're in a place where the hunting pressure is at a saturation point, none of that stuff matters. And so go ahead.
Sorry, I just cut you off.
That's all right, buddy. Go ahead.
The other thing about that though is if you're, so we could flip the situation and say you're a guy in Louisiana going to, you drew an Iowa tag or you drew a Kansas tag. If you don't understand the plants that are growing on the areas that you can hunt, and you don't understand how the deer are using those plants, funnels may not really matter at all. There could be the greatest funnel of all time, but if it's in a patch of trees that the deer, if there's a bunch of walnuts in there, the deer may not even be spending any time in there at all, So I think, you get your access points, figure out where you anticipate the most pressure is going to be, but then, kind of learning just about, it's something different, right? If I was in Louisiana, I've never even been to Louisiana yet. So it's I can make guesses on what the deer habitat's what's going to be good, but I don't know anything. I got to actually get there and just spend some time just learning about the plant life there and how the deer are interacting with that.
Yep.
Sorry.
No, that's all right, buddy. Yeah. And you make a good point there about funnels and pinch points, because we talk about them as if they're absolute places deer are always going to go through. And right. they have to have a reason. If they don't have a reason to go from one side to the other, it doesn't matter how awesome it is. I want to touch on one other thing that you brought up there, that, you said that you drive down the road really slowly and you're looking for tracks if the conditions allow for it. And that sounds like kindergarten stuff, right? But a lot of people go in with this idea that I've got all these pins dropped and I'm going to hike in here and look at this and hike in here and look at this. And what you're saying is, I'm just going to be open to the fact that this gravel road might clue me into a place where these deer cross in a way that I could never see on e-scouting. And sometimes, I know you guys have seen this, if you're in the right place with like patchwork public, where you've got, checkerboard public, private, and you might have really nice ag or feeders or something on the private, and then the public doesn't, you can cruise those section lines and see serious travel routes in the right conditions just by driving a road. And it sounds like too simple, but it works in some places.
I mean, it really works. It works well to, I think, just learn so much about, different edges that deer are using. I mean, like you said, deer transitioning from maybe they're bedding on public and they're moving to private to go to a feeder or a pasture with, just a different type of food source for them, where they're getting some diversity in their diet. One time we were in Alabama driving around and we found where two bucks were fighting on the road. Like, it was just plain as day. Like, there was definitely a buck fight right here, and it's like, man, that tells you there's two bucks here pretty close. It doesn't have to be anything like, I'm not saying that it tells you exactly where it is, but then you can kind of use your other skills, like just knowing where deer bed, to kind of reference that and say, okay, if there's two bucks right on this section of road, like, where did they come from? Where are they maybe going? If this happened at night, what time of night? How far are they from their bedding area? And stuff like that really can help put you right in the right spot. I love that. I love driving around looking at trails crossing the road. And again, it does seem kind of silly, but it definitely can put you in the game. At least it can help point you in the right direction, and maybe even teach you something about how the deer are interacting with the vegetation.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver, off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
I want to play this scenario out a little further, because I like where we're going here, and I want to let's assume that you start doing your drive, you're slow driving. And to be honest with you, Zach, I don't know if I fully believe you on this, because when I envision you driving around, I envision you driving just like you start walking into the woods. Like, I see you sprinting in the woods and screaming, "Let's hunt!" Well, I could just see you get in your truck and peeling out, put your head out the window and scream, "Let's hunt!" and then go 70 miles an hour down the dirt road. That's what I think actually happens. But
that's hilarious. I could actually see how you would think that, but it's funny because I get accused of driving like a grandpa all the time. And like, I actually get frustrated when my dad is driving when we're hunting, because I'm like, hey, you got to slow down. I'm looking at stuff. It's like pretty funny. But yeah, I can see where you think that.
Yeah. Well, let's say you do drive slow though, and as you do that, you're seeing tracks crisscrossing everywhere. You're even seeing like big tracks that make you think, ooh, that could be a big, heavy deer. Maybe you are driving at last light and there's some crop fields kind of on the edges of this marshy stuff down there, and you see like good bucks. And just the area is seemingly loaded with deer, more than you could have imagined. There's a bunch of deer hanging out in this area. But you decide to poke around in the woods, and you get to the first access point that you pinned. You start walking in there, and you bump into another guy who's walking out to hunt a tree stand. You pivot, and you go look at another spot, and there's 2 trucks at this access point. And then you decide to pivot again, and as you're hiking into another spot, you pass by 2 tree stands. So there's a lot of deer in the area, but you're finding people everywhere you turn. My question is, how do you navigate that situation? Do you say, all right, there's people everywhere, but there's also deer. I can work around them and figure them out. Or are you going to say, screw it, I'm finding somewhere else where there's not people all over the place?
If I think there's a lot of deer and there's a lot of, bucks, for example, like you've seen them and they're there and there's tracks everywhere. Like, I'm saying you can work around them in that situation, for sure. Like, sometimes then that's kind of helpful, really. If there's a bunch of deer, but there's a bunch of hunters, it really like limits where those deer, especially like your older bucks and does, are going to be hanging out, because people are so habitual, man. Like it's kind of weird. Like you go into certain areas of the country and everybody hunts the same way. Like everybody kind of does the same thing in gun season in Wisconsin. Like they all get up on a elevated box blind and they ride their 4-wheeler to the spot. Like, and if you can just kind of do something different than that, it's like a lot of times you surprise the deer. So I guess what then I would do if I'm in this Louisiana situation and, driving down the road, density's high, hunt deer, but also hunters, I would just really start focusing on some of those, like, how can I do something completely different? Maybe I park, maybe it looks like this. Maybe I park at the access point that everybody's parking at, but then I walk 2 miles down the road instead of driving my vehicle down there and just hunt right off the road, but have walked, a long way down the road. Maybe I, go or, get the waders out, cross like waist high water to get to a spot that otherwise is tough to get to. Maybe, I guess just really trying, I guess to find the common theme of like, what is everybody doing? Are they all walking in, putting up tree stands on a specific type of dry land, or are they hunting, is everybody hunting in the marsh? Whatever it may be, like just try to mix it up and do something different. Like it is really weird having traveled around into a lot of different places to see the tendencies of hunters. And like, you hear this, and I remember reading articles about this like long ago when I was in like middle school. I remember getting a magazine, it might have been like QDMA at the time or something, like, or whatever it was. I guess it doesn't really matter. Just like had this magazine article and was talking about, are deer patterning you? And like at the time, it made sense what the article was saying. But the more I hunt and the more I see different tendencies of hunters in a given region, the more I'm just like, these things are not even doing anything. They're not that far from you. And they're like the most tempting things, they tempt you, especially if you got trail cameras out and you're getting pictures of these deer. It's like they're literally living right where you're hunting. But how do you break up the same exact thing that everybody's doing? How do you get into a spot that's completely different? Maybe it's not even a spot, but maybe how you approach the spot. Maybe there's a guy that's got a tree stand in a spot and it's just a great spot. Deer go through it, but the deer are bedded in a position they know when he gets there. or they hear, they're bedded just close enough that when he climbs up the ladder stand and that ladder makes that pop, they hear it and they're like, okay, that's our cue to not go that direction today. Like, I think that stuff's happening like so much more than people give deer credit for. Unless, you spend a bunch of time hunting, like a ton of time hunting, you kind of overlook those things, I guess. So my best, the decision I would make at that point is if I feel like it's worth hunting, which it sounds like it is based off of the situation you've described. Like, I just want to try to pattern the hunters yet again. Like, how do I get to where the hunters are not?
Now here's an interesting situation that I think is happening more often these days now, where what you described is what someone plans on doing. They show up, they see there's hunting pressure out there, and then they determine, okay, I'm going to figure out what these other people are doing, and then I'll do the opposite of it. And right, like you're saying, a lot of times the current hunters are sitting in their tree stands in certain types of places, and once you figure that out, it's pretty clear how to get around that. But let's say when you show up at this spot and you're seeing all these deer and you're realizing there's hunters all over the place, what if you go back to the parking lot and you happen to see that there's two vehicles there in the parking lot and they both have THP stickers in the back window? And then you go to another spot and you bump into a guy and there's three buddies there, and those three guys are like, dude, Zach, we love you. We're doing all the same stuff you do. And you find out that there's 5 buddies all here hunting like you. How would you hunt around people that hunt like you do? All trying to stalk one down, walking around, scouting everything. How would you handle that?
Probably just, the reality is like, if that's the case and everybody's doing exactly the same thing as me, there is a certain point where like it's, pulling out and moving to a different location is reality for me. Like, if it gets to a point where I'm like, you know what, I'm not feeling it here, just move, like that's like an easy out answer though, I guess. Just it depends too on this piece of public, and like I try to almost always hunt an area that, like, prior to getting there, I feel like that's not going to be the case, as far as like there's just never going to be too many people with, no matter what their ideas are, where there's not enough room to breathe, I guess, and too, like, it doesn't matter to me as much. Like, I guess let's put it this way. I can guarantee if I'm going to go to Ohio, like, I can tell you the places where there's too much of exactly that, like what you described. But I can tell you, like, if I go to a place in Virginia, like, there's not going to be that, because it's just, there's more room, there's more, there's less. Honestly, people are so drawn to big bucks. It's kind of comical. Like, I don't care if there's not as many like big antlered bucks in an area. I'll just go to where there's like, less deer numbers probably, and smaller antlered deer. I guess that's one of those things to me too, where I feel like it gets to a point where, like, I'm not as caught up in shooting like the biggest antlered buck as much as I'm just like, I want to get out and I want to have the type of experience where I'm kind of out there alone. And if I feel like, I just have room to breathe. That's what I'm attracted to. I want adventure. I don't want to be bumping elbows with people. So, like, I guess there is just a point where if that is the case, I'll just get out of there, I'll just go do something else. But if I don't have another option, just to answer the question, I'm just going to keep, again, or just reading what everybody's doing. Like, I'll talk with hunters, see what they're thinking, see what they're doing, kind of give them my game plan or whatever. And if it's like too much, then I'll just bounce within that piece of public to a different section where we're kind of spreading ourselves out. I do think talking with other hunters is really important too, just saying, hey, like, we were hoping to hunt back in here, but like, what's your game plan? You know what I mean? And then, or we were hoping to hunt right in this spot back here. This is where we've been going. What's your game plan? Can we work around it, or should I go somewhere else? And, that's ultimately like what you have to do sometimes in some situations.
Yeah.
And if it gets too bad, just, pick up and drive. And I always have a backup plan, always save a bunch of maps that way. It's like, I've been in this situation a ton where I'm like, I've like hit a wall, man. It's like, drop down on my knees and I pulled my phone out and I start looking at like, where else can I go within this state where my tag, where my tag is legal. And I do that often. So, that's like kind of my final straw type deal.
Yep. I'm not letting you off the hook here completely, Zach, but I got to ask Tony a question. What would you do in that scenario, Tony? What if you were hunting a piece of public land and Zach, or like a Zach lookalike, or like wants to be like an acolyte of Zach, shows up, and a couple guys are going to start hunting the same public land that you're hunting, just like Zach does? How would you handle that situation?
I can tell you very specifically that one time I was hunting public land and Zach was across the river from me and I shot a buck and got out of there. Honestly, but no, I take the same approach. Yeah, I'm not joking there, Zach.
Well, you have to tell me more about that.
I thought you guys already talked about that. I didn't realize it's a secret.
I'm the same exact. Zach's answer there is my answer. I mean, I've gone to places, and a good lesson there, like with what he said, is, without saying it, was you can't fall in love with the idea of a spot. And you see people do this a lot when they're like, I'm going to hunt public land in this state and it's going to be awesome. And that's the spot. Like they take this WMA or they take something and they go, I got all my waypoints here. I got all my research, dedicated to one area. Then you show up and there's people everywhere, or it doesn't play out the way you hope. And if you don't have that backup, you're going to ride out a dead program. And so I do the same thing. I mean, I've had times where, I went down to Oklahoma one time to hunt a property that was big. And I was like, this thing is going to be unreal. And my buddy and I got down there, and after 2.5 days, I was like, this is terrible. There's people everywhere and we can barely see a deer. But we had backup spots. We drove 4 hours to a different area of the state and had an awesome hunt. And so I think if you're going to do this, you just have to have, like Zach said, like, what's your plan B? What's your plan C? And, are you of the mindset where you can just go, this is not what I want out of this hunt. I need to go find something different. And can you pull up camp and go do it? Or are you going to kind of default and say, well, maybe something will show up? I mean, I'm a mover, man. I don't like not enjoying my hunting. And if I'm in a position where I have no faith in my spot anymore, I don't enjoy it. And so it's like, it's worth it to burn a half a day or a day to go, drive somewhere new, pull up camp, scout somewhere new, and just try to get that reset moment where you can start enjoying it and get in the game again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. I mean, with turkey, we do it so easily that it's like, I don't know. It's like almost like old news at this point. Like, we pull into a place and there's people on, like, turkey's a really easy one. There's a lot of the situation you just described, Mark, of like, people doing the same thing. And it's like, if that's the case, I'm just leaving, like, no questions asked, like, not spending any amount of time on it, even if there is a bunch of turkeys. I mean, I hunted a place in West Virginia one time, but it was like, it was comical how many hunters were there. Now, it was also, on the flip side, the amount of turkeys was easily the most turkeys that I'd heard gobbling in one spot in the whole season. But it was like, we spent one day doing it, and Ben and I and my buddies and Colin, who I was hunting with at the time, were like, never again. Like, at least at this point in the season, like the first week of season in West Virginia, never hunting this spot again. Like, no way. It doesn't matter. I'd rather hunt a place with, like, a tenth of the birds than not see anybody, versus hunt this place where there's like, 4 on a tiny little ridge, but, also 5 guys going in after them. It gets to a point where, like, to me, that's not the experience that I want to get out of hunting. Is like, I don't feel like I want to have action that's like super consistently. I'd rather just have, an adventure. I love being on an adventure and being in new stuff. So, it quickly gets to that point for me, I guess.
Yeah. You want to throw up another situation, Tony?
Sure. So Zach, you've got this reputation as a guy who you stalk a lot of deer, but it's you've kind of got this style that's sort of a mix of spot and stalk and still hunting and even posting up on the ground. It's kind of this diverse ground game approach. And so we know that's what you like to do. That's what you're kind of wired for. So let's say you're hunting Midwest or the East, doesn't matter. Not a crazy, it's not Iowa whitetails. It's just a decent Midwestern or Eastern state. You're in a big chunk of public that's mostly deciduous forest. It's October 15th. A lot of the leaves are down. It's been dry for 3 weeks. It's super crunchy out there. And you've got, your cameraman behind you, and every step you take it's like stepping on potato chips. Do you ever hit a point when the conditions, and let's say it's pretty calm too, because it's warm. Do you ever hit a point like that where you're like, man, my preferred approach of slipping around and seeing if we can get eyes on one and crawling in just feels like that's not going to happen? Do you kind of default back to the saddles then, or do you just try to figure out a way to keep riding that program?
I just keep riding that program, but it definitely looks different. The situation you described is exactly what happened to me last year in bow hunting in Ohio. It was November, it wasn't October, but the leaves were down, and every time you stepped, it was like a bomb going off. It was brutal, and it was like, early November. It was like 70 degrees every day for the whole entire 7 days I was there. Just brutal, man. So loud, so hot, so dry. But I can just give you kind of that experience, and it's the same thing I would do. It's basically the same exact situation you just described. It's what I'm doing then is I'm not picking a spot even until I feel like there's a good enough sign. So I'm still cruising around, moving, but I'm just picking the quietest route. So I love to move because I'm too anxious to just sit for too long. I just kick myself if I sit for too long, but I will sit if I feel confident in a location, but I have to see the sign first. So for example, if I'm in that situation that you talked about, I'm going to try to find a route, because there's always a route. It may not be exactly where I'm going to be still hunting along and kill a deer, but it's a route that I can travel and learn about that area. So for example, maybe it's a ridge top. A lot of times there's a trail on a ridge top. It may be like a old 2-track or something, that may be the quieter option versus being down on the bench below where I actually think the deer are going to be bedded. But I can slowly move through that, change the pace of it a little bit, and just read that sign. Then that's going to give me the confidence to move in tighter and get set up and actually find a ground set up. Another location or route that I like to take is creek bottoms. I'll just get straight. If it's hot and dry, I can take my shoes off and just straight up walk down the creek. That's an option. Walking right on the inside bank of a creek, where there's just mud and you don't have to be on those dry leaves. But again, that's just trying to give me an idea of a spot, finding a spot that I feel really confident in setting up in. And then I still just set up on the ground. And, for me, it's just I keep trying to minimize what I take to the woods. I just don't like carrying stuff. And the other alternative to that is, prep stuff prior, but, hunting public land, there's not a whole lot of prep work you can do. You can't really put stands up and leave them, without the risk of them getting stolen. And I'm not in a place really long enough to do that anyway. So it's just don't like carrying stuff. Even as easy as the saddle is to carry, I just would prefer to not do it, because I like to go out all day. I like to carry a ton of water. I'm carrying 3 to 5 liters of water a day, depending on the temperature. Those days when it was November at 70 degrees, we had to bring 5 liters of water between cooking up a little freeze-dried meal or something, or just drinking in general. You get to a point where you need that water. So I don't want to sacrifice that to bring gear. So I still want to set up on the ground. And like, the more I do it, the more I'm just like, I really don't need a tree set up. I mean, there's really not many situations where I'm like, I can't figure this out. You learn how deer see and react to different setups enough. And it's like, you just know what you're going to get away with and what you're not going to. Yeah, there's some risk involved. Yeah, there's, windows where the setup isn't great. The deer kind of have to come through here, but, I'm willing to try it versus I just don't like bringing stuff in. I don't like climbing up. I think that climbing up gives you away a lot too, where deer hear you or see you climbing a tree and like maybe are like 150 yards. Like, what does that doofus doing climbing that tree? Like, I can hear him plain as day, and I guess I don't want to do that. So therefore I don't do it. I just keep playing the ground game. And then I just commit to setting up a little bit more. I find those routes where I can still hunt and scout. It doesn't have to be right through the heart of it, but it may be like, if I think, for example, there's a valley, if there's a valley and there's a bunch of finger ridges that are falling into that valley, I may walk that valley and try to find where the highest density of crossing trails is. If I find that X, then I can say, okay, I want to set up in here, or I want to set up close to here. And I just commit like to getting in there really early in the morning in the dark when, I'm not expecting as many deer to be in the bedding area, for example. So, yeah, I guess that's how I would approach it. And another thing is seriously, if it's wet and dry, I shift to like setting up close to water a lot more too, just because I kind of had a light bulb moment last year when in that situation where I was hunting really dry stuff, 70 degrees. I was up in this like great funnel, and it just made sense for deer to be crossing there. They could go from, a number of bedding ridges across this ridge that was kind of in between more bedding ridges, and they could just run up and over the saddle. There was tons of scarlet oak acorns that were dropping, but we were way up at the tip top, and I'm sitting there and I'm literally myself. I'm drying out, man. Like, I'm hot, just as uncomfortable. And I'm like, why would a deer ever in their right mind be spending any amount of time up here? Like, down there low, they can, for one, get shade, and two, they can get water, and three, it's been so dry that up here, everything's so dried out that there's not a whole lot of diversity as far as, vegetation goes. Definitely not as much as there is down that bottom. And man, we moved down that bottom, and within an hour, we had a monster come into 5 yards and didn't get a shot. And I guess he got close enough that he caught a whiff of us and then looked at us, and it was too late. But like, he just kind of caught us off guard. But being down in that position, we were in the game just by taking advantage of those conditions. And, to be honest, I don't think that I would ever change enough and I'm stubborn in that way too. I mean, I definitely am. It's like, I love when people say, you know what, man, you couldn't do that in this situation. It's like, you could. It doesn't, like, why does it have to be that way? Like, why do people say it has to be, you have to do it my way? It's like, if I want to do something different, I'll just keep trying, and like, I'll just keep adjusting. And yeah, I'm going to fail, but that's part of the fun of hunting. Is, to me, is like the failure. That's what keeps me coming back. I do, if every situation, it's just like, I'm just slaughtering deer, it's like, it would not be that fun. I love like failure and just like that check, it's like, hey, maybe I don't know what I'm doing in this situation, and that's cool. How do I learn? I want to learn,
Yeah.
Yep.
I guess.
Can I keep going down this road, Mark?
Do it.
So I love that you just said that right there about people saying that might work in Iowa, but it's not going to work here. I think one of the things that, but you hear it everywhere. Our deer hunting difficulty bias is like our bias toward our dogs, right? Everybody has the best dog. Like, you talk to somebody who owns a lab, it's the best dog ever. And the last dog was the best dog. It always, right? And then you
always get the best points, dude. You always have the best points. And he's going, this is great.
Well, but you brought it up, and it reminded me that when I started, I had all these preconceived notions growing up in Minnesota, hunting the way I did, and then starting to expand and go to these other states and hunt public land. What I realized is everybody has a local bias that they're hunting the most difficult deer. And it kind of ties into what you said earlier when you were like, people are pretty consistent across the board, or at least regionally, where they hunt a certain way. And you can kind of, some places you can pull up your, Onyx, and you can call your shots and say there's going to be a tree stand there, a tree stand there, a tree stand there. And people are insanely consistent, and habituated to their circumstances, but that works against them. Just like believing that you have the hardest deer possible, it gives you an out. Or, if you think, well, those Iowa hunters, they have it easy, and I live in X state and I have it hard. Well, that may be true, but it doesn't do you any good to focus on that. Like you're still hunting rabbits with antlers, and you can kill them in a shitload of different ways. Like you just got to kind of get out of your own way and just go, okay, well, maybe I'm not as lucky as somebody who owns 1,000 acres in southern Iowa, but I have this national forest to hunt. There's deer in there. They're killable. Or I have this, grandpa's farm or whatever. And I think so much of that mentality like that just works against us so much.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's really interesting to the out thing is so true. It's just like, well, but here we are in this place, and it's not this place. And it's like, yeah, it's not. But there's always a local that's kicking ass out there. There's always a local that's doing really well because they found a style that works for them, or they just recognize what their situation is, and they take advantage of it. And they learn what the deer are doing. They learn what the hunters are doing, and then they, take advantage of those things that they've learned. You got to go out and fail. And I just think that's, I don't know, it's something that we don't want failure, right? As hunters or just humans in general, we don't want to show that we failed. And that's, while that is true, I do believe that it's healthy to show or, admit that you're failing and say, hey, why am I failing? Why, if you are failing, why? And then what can I do to change that? And, you hear it all the time. And I mean, it's kind of cliche almost at this point. It's with the rise of social media and hunters, sharing pictures of big bucks, other hunters feel discouraged when, it really is becoming a cliche thing. It's you've read that article before, you've heard that podcast, whatever. It's but I guess it's just, who gives a shit? Who cares? Why do you worry about failing? Because 9 times out of 10 or way more probably, you don't kill a deer. There might be, it might be every third hunt you even have a deer in range. So it's it doesn't matter. And why compare yourself to other hunters? Because there's no more true thing in hunting than this. Everybody's hunting situation and goals are different, period. What I think is, what is a goal to me is not a goal to you guys necessarily. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but who cares? To me, when I go hunting, it's me versus the woods and the deer. I'm just going out to be competing against them. They are living in their world. I'm trying to be a predator in their world, and I'm trying to go in and trick them. And I just think it's why care? Why compare? Because if you start, and it's so crazy that the routes to comparing you can go. If you're sitting comparing your antler score, that's why I think score is so ridiculous. It's your antler score, if you live in, the Southeast, for example, if you live in North Florida and you're comparing score to what guys are shooting, even in Tennessee, you're probably going to get discouraged. And then the guy that's comparing his score in Tennessee to the guys in Iowa or Kansas, he's probably going to be disappointed. Go out, set goals for yourself that you feel are realistic, and just go have fun, because it's no competition. And it just is I don't know, it's frustrating to think that it is a competition. And it doesn't matter what anybody else's goals are. Make your own, have fun. It's a sport that's meant to be just fun.
Yeah. And it's an individual pursuit.
At this day and age, it's fun.
Yeah. Hey, Mark, can I keep going? I got to keep going on this.
No,
all right.
No, you're fired. Too much.
I'm down. I'm having a blast. So let's keep doing it.
So I want to talk about failure. because, you brought it up, and I always use the example of like an over-the-counter elk hunt in Colorado, which is, everybody's default elk hunt. Like if whether we love failure, hate it, or indifferent, whatever, how you feel about it. If you say, I'm going to go do that hunt, you're saying almost with certainty you're going to fail as far as killing an elk. But that's not why you're going. You're going to elk hunt and have the experience. Like we have a harder time with whitetails in that same, like getting that mindset right with whitetails. It's like so important to kill, and we're like averse to this failure, but it's such a integral part of it. Like it's coming no matter what. And so like that example you gave, Zach, of when it was super hot and you're sitting there on top and you're going, why would a deer be here? Like you're hunting a place you shouldn't be hunting, or a spot. And dude, I had an exact same light bulb moment probably like 5 or 6 years ago in Nebraska. Same kind of deal. It was like 75 degrees. I'm sitting on this top in this public land that I've killed big bucks in, and I'm seeing nothing. And I was just sitting there sweating my ass off, and I'm going, why would a deer be here? Like they're not here, obviously. Like I'm not seeing them. They're not coming through here.
Right.
And I've got this stream in the valley below me with, all these nice conifers along it and this good cover. And I'm like, why are you sitting up here failing at this when like you'd feel better down there? That's probably where they are. And I did the same thing. I went down there and I killed a buck. I didn't even have like my shirt on. I was wearing a t-shirt and hung a stand, and he came in right along the creek. I mean, it was like over, and I hadn't hardly seen a deer in 2 days hunting a. And it's like one of those moments where like, yeah, that's awesome because the success came, but really the important part was like questioning why you're failing so bad. Like why are you sitting here wasting your time doing something that like if you start to question it and go, why is this not fun? Why is this not working out? You're going to make different decisions and probably move in that right direction. But it's like a hard thing to overcome sometimes.
Those little epiphanies though are what are so fun. It's huge. I mean, totally. That's it. It's the journey, the process, having those little aha moments. As soon as you start learning to appreciate that and realize like that's really the thing we're chasing here in a lot of ways, that's the ticket.
Definitely.
I would agree with that as well. I mean, it's like we all want, when we go hunting, we all want like a certain thing to happen. Like that's the goal is like, I want this deer to walk down this trail in front of my setup, or I want to find a bedded buck or whatever. And it's like when all of a sudden it does happen exactly what you want to have happen, that's when you feel like on cloud nine. You're like, man, I knew exactly what was going to happen in this situation. And like most times though, you don't, and you just got to keep chipping away at it. It's like, yeah, I mean, you're gonna like hunting is like lower odds than you have a batting average, you think of a good batting average being over 300 or whatever. It's like your hunting batting average is not over 300. Like mine isn't, you know what I mean?
No,
right.
Like, more times you're going to fail. So it's just, I guess it's just one of those things. If you embrace it, you're going to have a lot better time. And then the other thing is like, what is failure? Because I always say I'd rather be around. I guess let's put it this way. There's a lot of hunters that have found like what works and they just keep doing the same exact thing. And those people start to get to a point where it's like, I'm not as interested in what they're doing because for their situation, I've learned, or they've figured that out and they just keep doing it. I'm almost, well, not almost. I enjoy having a conversation with people. Like I love talking to a guy that's only hunted a few years or, just less than me in general, but is just like super curious. Like they're asking questions. They're like, what type of tree is this? What would you do right here? Or whatever. Like asking a bunch of questions. You can tell they just care about it and they're thinking about it a lot. And like, if you're doing that, in my opinion, you're not failing ever. If you're always asking yourself, like, why didn't that work? I can't really figure out why that deer did that, but I'm thinking about it a lot. What do you think? They want to have those conversations. They want to dive into like just deep thought about the situation, and then how do you ever fail? Because you're just trying to learn. And I think if you're trying to learn, you're never failing in hunting, because it's just, you can just being curious about it, man. I think it's huge, and just caring, because if you say, I didn't get one, I failed, and you give up, it's just like if that guy was on your football team, like, you don't like that guy.
No.
Right? It's like, if you lose a game, and that guy's like, oh man, we lost. He tucks his tail, puts his head down. It's like, hey man, we got to get back to work. It's like, we got to get back in, and we got this week in practice, we got to like really focus on the things that we did wrong, and then we got to get better. And I think that, that I find myself relating sports to hunting a lot these days. Honestly, it's just, having a positive mentality in it, and, just keep continuing to improve is important.
Yeah. I think the two of the most important questions that should like always be on the tip of your tongue during hunting season is, number one, why? When something happens, asking yourself, like we're talking, like, why did this happen? Why isn't this working? Or even, why does this work? And the second question is, what now? If you're always asking yourself those questions, why did this happen? Or why did that deer do that? Or why did this not work? And then, what now? Okay, how do I deal with that situation? Rather than tucking your tail, rather than giving up or saying, woe is me, it's like, okay, that thing happened, or I learned this thing, or I observed this thing. What now? How do you move forward? Like those two things, constantly ask yourself those two things and keep moving forward and enjoy it. And that's it.
Actually, I think a thing to add to that too is just like really nail that, like really pound the mistakes into your head. Like don't forget that thing again. If you make a mistake, try not to make it again. Like I'll use an example from last year. Is like the most bonehead mistake that haunts me and will probably haunt me for a long time is it was that time of the year in November, Ohio, hot, dry. Found a really good funnel, had set up close to it, knew there was probably a hot doe in the area just based off the day prior. We were basically set up right in the perfect spot where it was going to pinch deer down to inside of 20 yards in hilly terrain, which isn't always an easy thing to find, but we felt good that we were in the right spot. Looked down about 9 o'clock, the only deer we had seen all morning, shooter buck cruising. It was one of the bucks that we'd seen the day before. He's cruising down below us on the bench, 120 yards down the hill. And, I love talking about the little things, the little things that we do that can cost us an opportunity or whatever, it can blow the deer or before we get a shot or make us miss or whatever. And one of the things that I always try to do well is be ready, just like always being ready. And this deer went down below us and he had just got outside. We tried grunting to him. He didn't have any reaction to it at all. And I looked at Keith, who I was hunting with, and should we just try to rattle? I don't really want, that was like the last resort, because it's like in a different situation, we just try to cut him off and try to get a different angle on him, but we couldn't move because we had too much crunchy. It was just, the conditions were too crunchy, too calm, that we didn't feel like we could ever, fool him. As fast as he was moving, we were never going to be able to get in front of him quiet enough without spooking him. So the last resort was, well, we'll rattle and make a bunch of noise. But when I rattled and made a bunch of noise, it worked great. Keith and I were both banging about it, like thrashing in the leaves, rattling, and the deer was on us before I was even done rattling. Like I was just setting the antlers down, and he's at 15 yards coming fast, and he's coming, right at us. And the mistake that I made is there are two mistakes really breaking down the situation. Is I should have stopped midway through the rattling sequence to listen to see if I could hear him, because again, the crunchy conditions, that was an advantage that we had, is that we could hear a ton. So I didn't do that. But then on top of that is I had turned to face where the deer was, but in my setup, I had been facing the other way when we were just sitting there, looking for deer and waiting. and my bow was on the other side of me. And the deer ran up to like literally 6 yards, and before he knew anything was up, and I ruined it because I wasn't ready. And I mean, it would have been the most chip shot of all time. This thing was at point blank, and I wasn't ready, and I didn't have my bow in front of me. So like, again, I kick myself. I think about it all the time. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat because I've been having a nightmare about it. I'm just kidding. But I think about that all the time. But like, the worst thing I could do now is make that same exact mistake in the future. Now it's just like focusing on that little thing and just being like, sometimes it seems like the most basic lesson ever, but like, just make sure your bow's in front of you, make sure you got an arrow nock, make sure you're ready, and I just pound that into my brain for the future to hopefully never make that mistake again. And it's like, I could powder out about it, and I definitely do sometimes in my own head for sure. It's like, damn, I wish I wouldn't have done that. But hey, you got to just cut your loss and say, next time I'm going to do better. And the chances are that I'm going to be in a similar situation to that again. It's probably not going to look exactly the same. I mean, chances are I'm not going to be behind that same exact log on that same exact ridge, rattling to a buck with those same exact conditions, but I'll be in something similar, and just learning from that mistake is like, to me, that is what makes somebody really a good hunter. It doesn't matter what you're shooting. It's just like, can you look at your mistakes and say, hey, this is what I did wrong. Here's what I'm going to change in the future, cut my losses and move on.
Yeah. Well, and what's really important about that lesson too is, you talk about that buck coming to 6 yards and how easy the shot would have been if you'd have been ready. But everybody who bow hunts gets surprised by them. And that's when bad shots happen. So you didn't have the chance to get off a shot there, but every bow hunter with a couple seasons under his or her belt has been out there, in quiet conditions or just not paying attention, just got set up and then looked and that buck's walking through and it's a mad scramble. And that's when the panic sets in, and that's when gut shots happen. That's when misses happen. And that's when you just fall apart, So like you said, paying attention, if you get that, 10-second lead time, or you see that movement in the brush 50 yards away versus 15, you got a lot better chance of making a good shot because you have a chance to get your shit together versus just all of a sudden having that Chinese fire drill and being in real trouble.
Yeah. And looking back on that situation, what I would change exactly is I would just not turn towards the deer while rattling. I would have just stayed quartered towards my bow, rattled with my knees still facing my bow, twisted to the left and made the noise to the left, paused mid-rattle, heard him coming, dropped the antlers, grabbed my bow, and then just, I read antlers a lot on the ground. Like, I stay low enough, and I practice draw where I can stay low and, knowing that the deer can't see me just based off what I'm low enough that I can only see his antler tips, and I'm just reading that. I had it drawn low and then just slowly rose up, and he, chances are high that if I would have done all those things a little bit different, it would have been money. But like, had I been in that same situation, let's say, turned the wrong way, rattling, even if I do pause and hear him coming, I'm in that situation, like you said, where I'm scrambling. I got to turn back around. I got to grab my bow. I got to get ready. And at that point, maybe he's too close, and it gets sloppy. But like, just in general, I look back at that and I'm like, what in the hell was I doing? I mean, just so sloppy, like just not good. But hey, sit and complain about it or pout about it. But like, the reality is next time I just got to try to do better. Take advantage of, or make sure you're doing the little things.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something. because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
What about a slight variation on that situation that I imagine has happened to you? I know stuff like this is similar to this has happened to you, but I think a lot of other people, if they're trying this kind of thing, it would happen too. Whether you're sitting in a place like you were kind of waiting or stalking in on a spot and you get pegged by a buck that you were either moving in on or he moved in on you. He's right at the edge of your range, let's say. So he's not a chip shot, but he is hypothetically in range. He's on alert. Mm-hmm. You have your bow. You have an arrow knocked, but he is on alert. He knows something is kind of up. He's doing the head bob. He's curious, unsure, not quite aware, though, that he should be out of there right away. In that situation, given some of the experiences you've had, what's the best thing to do in that situation from your perspective? Do you wait till he makes any kind of tiny little movement and then just go for the snapshot, or are you going to wait it out and wait till he's comfortable again and starts walking away? What's the take in that situation if you could have taken a shot?
Just stay calm, I think. Like, read that deer, cover your face and your eye, hopefully you've got your face and your eyes covered as best as possible, and just stay calm, because I've had that happen a lot, actually. The buck I shot in New York totally saw me, but he didn't know what I was. The buck in North Dakota that I shot last year, he saw Jake, didn't know what Jake was. So I've been in that situation, and the best thing, it runs through your mind every time. Should I just draw and sit up and shoot? And I don't think, I think sometimes it works. And I guess in one situation I did that. I did do something similar, but we'll kind of loop back to that. In most situations, I think deer, and again, it comes with a little bit of experience of knowing what deer can see and what they can differentiate from danger and just a blob in the woods. I think deer see head and shoulders, and face. I think face is a big one too. So a lot of times I pull if a deer's close or I know a deer's close, I really shade my eyes with my hat and basically cover half my eyes with my hat, or put my bow cam in front of my face, because I think that they see those two predator eyes, looking right at them, especially they're 20, 30 yards. They're like, what is that thing? That doesn't look right. And if you've ever seen a human face in the woods, sometimes it does stick out hundreds of yards. It's just whoa, there's a person sitting right there. I can see their face. So covering face is important. And then, I really do grow my hair out at this point. I grow it out because I like it, number one. But number two, it breaks up the head and shoulders, I think that's human outline. Human standing on two legs and obviously walking across the landscape. Deer pick up on that quick, but also just that head and shoulder outline is very specific to humans. And I think they pick up on that as, predator danger real quick. So, if like, let's say, and movement's the other final straw. So like if a deer's locked onto you and he's head bobbing and he's at, your range is 30 yards and you're like, I know he's right at 30. He's like, I know I can make that shot. He's broadside right now. And you rip the bow back. I mean, see ya later. He's, I would say 9 times out of 10 running. Now, if you have a little bit of front cover, and maybe it's worth a shot. I'm not saying that 100% of the time it does not work, but if they're already pretty locked on and they're already like, on max suspicion of like, is that a predator? And you blow up out of your hide, they're probably going to run. So in my experience, I've just been really, really patient, stayed low, looked at their antlers, and really just make that read, once they're not looking at you, to make that move. So I'll use the example of New York real quick. New York, I was stalking in on a buck that was better with a doe, and I was staying along a shaded, the wind was coming out of crosswind. I love a crosswind when moving in on deer. Staying in on a shaded fence line, and as I was moving towards them, they stood up, and I knew they were bedded, and I didn't know exactly. I mean, I pretty much knew exactly where, within like a 10-yard circle, I knew where they were. But I was playing it slow and safe, and then they stood up, and I could see the buck's antler tips, and I just started reading that, and I was moving in, and every step I would take, I would like pick the next step, right? I would like pick the next little patch of shadow or place also where I could get knelt down and draw my bow without getting hung up on stuff. So like really particular about where I'm making these next moves. And midway through, as I'm like cutting distance, really cutting some distance, a car like stops or something, or like revved the engine, maybe even just hit a stop sign. I don't really even know what happened, but you can hear it in the footage. The engine revs up, deer looks at the engine, or wherever that sound's coming from, and just like freaks out, and he just takes off running. And he does a few bounds, and he ends up landing right in front of me at like, I don't know, bow range, pretty easy shot. But what I had done is, because I had been picking that next spot, I already had my next spot picked. And as soon as he started bounding, I just like, 1-2, quick, scurried right into a little patch of shade. I got down and into a ball as small as I could, and I put my cam in front of my face, my hat down over my eyes, and I just was barely looking at him through my hat bill and my bow cam. And he runs like head on right at me and stops at, I don't know, let's just say 25, 30 yards. I don't know exactly how far, but I know it's really, really close. And he's locked on. Like his tail goes up. He starts like kind of stomping towards me. And I just waited, and I mean, it went through my head. It's like, man, he's close. And as he started walking closer, like, man, I might be able to just whip this bow back and shoot him right in the chest. And I'm like, you know what? That's never going to happen. Like, never, ever going to happen. I mean, your mind's racing at this point. My heart's going through the roof. And I just remember thinking to myself, it's blown if you move. If you move at this point, you've blown it. The only chance you have is if he circles back to that doe and starts worrying about that doe again, or worrying about some other, issue that could be going on in his brain, whether it's that car or whatever. You have to wait till he looks away from you, and then you got to try to draw. So because I had that crosswind, it was moving from right to left, and he had to if he wanted to circle me or that doe, he had to go to the left. And he just started walking, and he cut back into taller grass. And again, just waiting for him to not see his eye. I really think it's kind of as simple as that. If you can't actually see their eye at all, then you're safe. But like, they'll check you too. Like what he did the first time, and I didn't draw on this, is he checked me. Like he acted like he wasn't looking, and he looked to the right, and then he snapped it back to the left, and he checked me, and I let him have that one. And then he did it again because he started to trust the situation, because he checked me and I didn't move even when he allowed himself to be vulnerable. And I just like let him have that one. And then he looked again, and I drew stand really low, knowing that he at this point is starting to kind of go into this ocean of grass. I drew back slowly, and then he looked a third time at that doe, and I literally stood all the way up and I shot him at 20 yards, just like I would shoot a 3D target in the yard. And I mean, it ended up just being a complete chip shot. Like he was looking the other way at 20 yards. So that's one situation. Another situation is in Nebraska, I crawled in on a buck a few years ago, I guess 2018, and I knew exactly where he was bedded. I had a spot picked where I thought I was going to be inside of 20 yards or right at 20 yards or whatever, and I ended up getting there, and here's this buck laying. I ranged him 3 times, 19 yards. I'm like, man, like all he's got to do is stand up. And Logan, who was the guy that was filming at the time, he was up on the hill, and he was just barely skyline. Like the way he had to get up with the camera, he was just barely, sticking out. He was wearing a ghillie suit, so he didn't look like a human, but he definitely was abnormal in that landscape. And I was wearing a ghillie suit, and I'm also just like tucked up against the cedar tree. I'm not perfectly covered, but I'm, I know that they can't tell exactly deer can't tell exactly what I am. And I'm watching this buck bedded. And in the meantime, a smaller buck came in and walked up to like point blank. He's probably 5 or 7 yards away on the other side of the creek. And he starts looking at me, and then he starts looking at Logan up on the hill. And you just can't really tell what we are because we're not moving. Neither one of us are moving. And he eventually gives up on wins in our favor. That's important to note. And he eventually gives up on the situation. And for some reason, I almost made a bonehead mistake here. As that other buck worked away, I looked up at Logan to make sure that he wasn't like signaling me, something. I don't really even know why I cared at that point. Again, it was kind of bonehead. For a second, actually what happened is I panicked. I was like, I hope he's got enough battery, or I hope he's got enough memory in the card. And then I thought, why does it matter at this point? But I looked up at him. It's the only movement I made since I got into the setup, 20 minutes prior. And I look up at him, and I look back, and the buck is standing up looking in our direction, the buck that I'm trying to shoot. And that was one of those situations where I knew prior, I'd visualized how he was going to stand up in that bed. I could see how his body was oriented. I knew that if he stood up and he took one step, he was going to be, there wasn't going to be a lane there. And he stood up, he's looking in my direction, got a ghillie suit on. I, got a pretty good amount of cover. And I thought, whatever, it's now or never. He takes one step, he's out of there. And I just pointed I'd already had the arrow pointed right at him. And I just, with as much or with as little movement as possible, I just drew the bow straight back, settled the pin, and shot him, and he never moved. So 2 kind of different situations there, and 2 slightly different, again, every situation being a little different. I did decide to pull the trigger there, but he wasn't as locked on. Like, I think he probably at that point was just like, like that's kind of weird that something's right there. And had not really put that, he hadn't got fear in him yet of that might be a predator. I think he just thought, well, that's something different. And my movement was so minimal, and I was so broken up with that ghillie suit that, I think that I did get away with it, but not every situation I would do that. I would say most times play it safe and just wait for them. And if you're not moving, they're probably not going to run. Like, it is really weird. And like we're taught when we first start hunting, or at least a lot of us, growing up in the East and the Midwest, you're taught to get into a tree stand and what movement you can and can't get away with, how to get, the right cover for a tree stand. But we're not really taught like what deer can and can't see when you're on the ground. And we give deer too much credit, because what they are really good at is skylining you in a tree. They can pick a human body out of a blob out of a tree pretty easily. But when you're on the ground and you're broken up, sometimes it can be a tuft of grass that's between you and the deer, and they just can't really pick up if you're not moving. But if you're moving around, they can see really well. But they're their eyes are definitely different than ours. Like, they just don't see the same things. Movement is bad. Having your face exposed, I think, is bad, but like, it's really crazy what you can get away with on the ground, and just like, you kind of have to relearn what is right and wrong, I guess, because in a tree stand, you play the situation a little bit different because they're not looking up all the time, but on the ground, you just have to read the deer, and I don't know. I guess I just think of it as often like, I'm surprised at what you can get away with. And my setups now sometimes are like, a few years ago, I'd been like, oh, that's a sloppy setup. That'll never work. And it's like, sometimes now I'm like, you know what? If a deer comes right from that direction, it's going to work. And it may not work from every direction, but I feel most confident in the deer coming from that spot. If he does, it'll work. And it doesn't have to be like super fancy. Sometimes it's just a log in front of you. Sometimes it's just a big tree in front of you. You're just kind of hiding off to the right side of the tree, looking to draw around it. It just, I don't know, set up things look a lot different. I guess I got way off track of your original question. But yeah.
I'm loving it. And it's just got me chomping at the bit even more than I was to take off in like 10 days, heading out for my first hunt of the year. And I got to believe Tony and a whole bunch of other people listening are feeling the same way. So you've done your job well, Zach.
Well, thanks. I just, it's something that I got just extremely passionate about when I started doing it. It's my favorite thing. It really, hunting deer off the ground in that style, man, is just like, I guess this is why I promote it so much. It's like, it doesn't have to be hunting off the ground. It could be hunting out of a tree saddle or a tree stand, or maybe it's hunting deer off of a horse or something. I don't know, whatever like really makes you tick. Like that to me is you can make it so much more fun if you just kind of find a style that works for you. And I was in a rut of deer hunting, not the right type of rut. I was just like kind of doing the same old thing over and over again, and I was getting kind of tired. I loved it. It was always my favorite thing, but hunting off the ground has made it that much more of my favorite thing. Like, it's awesome.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up, because this message of just finding what you enjoy, finding where your passion is, and chasing it, regardless of what other people do, or regardless of what other people say is going to work or not going to work, or no matter what other people think is okay for you to shoot or not shoot. Like, I think the moral of a lot of this is go back to what makes, what scratches that itch for you, what gets you fired up, and just do it shamelessly. Screw everybody else. If it's legal and if it does it for you, enjoy the hell out of it. So,
yep,
I'm all about it. So, Zach, you have made it through the What Would You Do Gauntlet. You have survived. You've proved yourself very worthy of the challenge. We got to wrap it up, but I've got one last like rapid fire round of questions for you. And then that'll be it. So these will be like 1-word answers is all we're going to give you. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So real quick, does the moon matter to deer movement? Yes or no?
Yes, but I don't understand it.
Okay.
I would say it probably has an impact, but I don't understand it.
Okay. Would you take a 50-yard shot at a whitetail with your bow? Yes or no?
Ooh. No.
If you could only have one of these tools for the rest of your hunts forever, which one would you take? Rattling antlers or grunt tube?
Grunt tube.
Expandable or fixed blade broadheads?
Fixed blade.
Should you stop a buck with a sound if he's walking before shooting? Yes or no?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's one that I could go on and on about, and I think it's very situational, but yes.
Yes. Okay. If you could only pick one season that you were allowed to scout, which season would it be? Winter, summer, or fall?
Fall.
Which state has the better deer hunters, Iowa or Ohio?
Oh man, I don't know. No comment.
Okay, fair enough. Got to
I
keep
don't
good
wanna
graces
offend
with
anybody.
your.
I don't want to offend anybody.
Don't want to piss off your buddies in Iowa or the locals where you grew up.
Yeah, exactly. I'd rather just There's no That's
It's
no
a trick
comment.
question.
It's a great question.
It's a trick
but
question. All right, here's one that you can expand on a little bit. So imagine that I am omnipotent. I have full control of everything in the world, and I'm going to take away your hunting privileges for the next 10 years. No more hunting at all. Unless you kill a mature buck this year on public land, Zach. So let's say a 4-year-old buck. You got to kill a public land 4-year-old buck this year to keep the next 10 years of hunting available to you. But here's the rub. You only get 1 day to do it and 1 spot to do it in. And since you hunt you hunt a different way than some people, you can have like a type of spot that you want to walk around and check out. So give me the day you're going to pick, what date you would think you've got the very best chances, and then describe to me the kind of spot you would ideally want to pin your hopes on for this very high stakes hunt.
Like first, it would be like real early in the season. Let's just say I've had pretty good success on like the 5th and 6th of September. So I'll say 6th of September, in just any wide open country where I know there's a good water source. So like if there's water and it's like, so a river bottom, with hills around it and pretty open, that's where I want to be. That's where I feel the most confident. Just where I can see a deer, ideally see a deer bedded. That's where I feel the most confident. Like I would say that, yeah, seeing is really important to me. So that definitely makes me feel like I could be successful. And that date, just kind of love the mentality of deer. Like it's just kind of laying around, kind of like that.
Yeah.
And if you get them in an open country and they're just laying around and you can see them, it's nice. So that's where I've had probably the best success consistently. Really,
I like it. That's a super fun way to hunt. I know Tony and I both are with you on that one. So you did it, Zach. Appreciate you bearing with us through all these questions, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Oh yeah,
thanks,
I
buddy.
enjoyed it a ton. I had a blast.
I hope we can do it again sometime soon. Good luck on these hunts you got coming up, and we'll check in with you after September 6th and see if you killed one already.
Yeah, that's good. That'll be right about the time to see too, because I'm gonna go to I got a New Mexico deer tag. It's a like fork antler deer, so any buck, I can shoot. Probably
Nice.
gonna be mule deer out there mostly, but that's and it's gonna be open country, so we'll see. Fingers crossed that we can pull it off. So
Love it.
yeah,
All right.
we'll give her a go.
Best
Good
of
luck
luck.
to you guys too. Have a good season.
All right, thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah.
All right, and that's a wrap. I will just remind you that if you're not already following Zach and the Hunting Public team, you got to check them out. They're producing some of the very best whitetail content out there. Their deer tour is kicking off in just a matter of probably days from when this episode drops. So be sure to check out the Hunting Public on YouTube. They're on Instagram. They're on iTunes. Basically anywhere you want to find stuff, they've got something. So check out what Zach's doing and the whole crew. Give them a subscribe, watch their content, and you will not regret it. So that's all I got for you today. Thanks for listening. Appreciate you being here. Best of luck with your archery practice, with your final scouting, with your trail camera pulls, whatever you're doing. Get after it. Have some fun. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.